with the mall and its wide open spaces now behind us, and its frame of the brooding presence of government structures surrounding it, receding into the distance, the unfolding scene became smaller, the streets narrower, the houses drabber, except in the brightly lit streets that appeared like rivers of commerce in some places. We mixed with the flow of those rivers, amidst crowds that moved about, apparently without aim or a purpose. Myriad forms of advertising cried out, aiming to capitalize on the aimless wanderer's apparent lack of purpose, each of the displays of commerce suggesting in bright colors their own purpose as being something vital and irresistible, a must-have for the aimless. Apparently they succeeded, like fishermen do by the river, dangling their worms and shiny reflectors before the fish, which likewise seem to float about without a purpose that they are conscious of. A few of the commercial establishments dangled their lures in great designs that displayed the word palace. There was Aladdin's palace across the street, a building of an oriental design, bathed in pink light. It seemed to be a club of sorts. One of the names of the commercial palaces started with the word temple written in huge letters. It seemed that the fish in these nightly rivers of commerce came with an apparent disadvantage that the fish in the real rivers didn't have. Sylvia pointed this out to me when we came closer to the temple, a place that advertised itself amidst colorful scenes as the temple of unrequited love. "What do you suppose that means?" she asked. "Well, it could be a bar, a dance hall, a strip joint, a theater, anything of the kind that capitalizes on a human condition that the fish in the Potomac River would know nothing about. It might be a temple dedicated to the poverty of the rich," said Sylvia, and began to laugh. "Or it's a temple dedicated to the poverty of the impotent," I added. I told Sylvia Erica's story that takes the concept several steps farther. I told her that Erica was abducted one dark night after an evening class at the university in Leipzig. A man had followed her. He had forced her into a building that he apparently knew would be empty. She decided that it might be too dangerous to fight the man off, while it would cost her far less to let him have what he obviously needed. She told me that at first the man had covered her mouth so that she couldn't scream, and then when she didn't struggle to fight him off, he covered her mouth with his lips to steal a kiss, which she let him have willingly. That's when she felt him explode in his pants, by which the tension suddenly drained away. He apologized to her profusely. He even asked her for a date before he walked away, which she refused, of course. However, she felt ashamed afterwards about her refusal to fulfill an apparent deep unfulfilled need. She had replied to him that he was an intelligent person, and should therefore be able to establish many friendships with many women. His response had been that he had found only closed doors. She felt sad for him afterwards, being alone again, while she waited at the streetcar stop. She had told me that she felt sad that society had become so poor in its games that this man went starving amidst a sea of plenty. But mostly she felt sad and ashamed of herself that she found herself no different than the rest of society. Why couldn't she have offered the man a date in a public place for a cup of coffee and a chat? She was ashamed suddenly at realizing how little this gesture would have cost her, and how much it would have meant to him as an acknowledgement of him as a human being. It might have given him the courage not to give up hope. "That's quite a story," said Sylvia. "That really happened?" "Apparently so," I replied. "I'm sure she didn't make this up. No one would invent such an unbelievable story." "But Peter, that's a story about pity, not love. Aren't pity and love contradictory terms? One can't really love out of pity, can one? Isn't that a bit like asking why elephants fly?" I said to her. "I think the distinction that you are referring to between pity and love is invalid. Elephants don't fly. This fact makes that question invalid, just as is yours." If Erica had not been moved by a deeply rooted sense of love for a fellow human being, and had not felt him worthy to be enveloped in love as a human being, for what reason then would she have agonized over that incident and her inability to respond with a loving gesture? Isn't that what the man had really asked for? She realized afterwards that she would have enjoyed responding in such a loving manner, and would have found it enriching. And what about the man? Why should his love, that had been starved, that had been countered with so many closed doors to make him as desperate as he became, not have been nourished by her? I think this is what Erica had been asking herself. Maybe the temple offers an answer to this question. Why don't we go in and see what the Temple of Unrequited Love has in store for us? Said Sylvia. It probably has no bearing on Erica's case, I said, but I agreed that it was intriguing. It seemed to be a place for dancing. I saw pictures of a dance floor and a band in one of the display windows. Thus, arm in arm, we lined up at the temple's entrance. The cover charge of $5 each promised live music. More enticing, however, was the inscription on a banner that loomed at the rear wall, above another gallery of photographs. The banner was strung high above the two doorways that were the entrances to the dance hall. "Please dance with a stranger" was printed in silver letters on a wide red band. No one could not have seen the banner and its message, that had been strung across the wall from corner to corner, as if it were a condition for entering. Surprisingly, the place was crowded, considering that we came quite early in the evening. Half the space in the hall was devoted to the dance floor and the band, with a sea of small tables and chairs surrounding the main attraction. Actually, the main attraction were the people themselves. We found a tiny table in an obscure corner of the place, but we barely got there when Sylvia became the attraction for a neatly dressed Spanish-looking man. "May I have the honor to dance with a lady?" he said to both of us and bowed to Sylvia. Sylvia said, "Yes," and smiled, and followed the man. Before I realized what happened, I was invited too. Seconds later I found myself on the dance floor facing a total stranger, but she wasn't like a stranger at all. We were moving with the music in a flow of rhythms and gestures and sounds that became our dance, and she and I became one with the flow of the music and the center of it, so it seemed. The woman who invited me was rather ordinary looking in the general sense, but looking closely, I noticed a faint familiarity in the features of her face that reminded me of the fabled Dodo from a TV fantasy situated at a remote outpost at the edge of civilized space. As the dance progressed, the familiarity broadened. But there the familiarity ended. Her moves, her reactions to the music, her faint shy smile, and secret smug grin of satisfaction in the enjoyment of the dance, were far from ordinary and familiar. They mirrored in many ways my own responses in the whirlwind of the dance, which seemed all new. She was of a freckled complexion that suited her well in the way she was dressed. Nor did she try to hide the fact that the freckles extended deep down on her breasts. To the contrary, her deep-cut dress was not designed to hide anything. She was proud to be herself just the way she was, and stood tall with her red-brown hair tied high rather than it hanging down loosely. She had a faintly exotic, Hungarian, and down-to-earth kind of look about her. She became a puzzle in that sense, that became constantly more complex and intriguing. I felt lucky to be in a dance with her that made it quite acceptable for me to drink in that wonderful sight before me with looks that might otherwise be construed as staring. Dancing allows this deeper inward looking with an unfolding embrace of her that was constantly broadening. It struck me that this is what the dance might have been intended to evoke, breaking the barriers of the universal apartheid of so-called civility. It seemed to me in the flow of the dance that the deeper I looked, the more I found an echo of myself unfolding in her, an echo of our common humanity, in which we stand side by side with one another as human beings, so that I found myself enriched by her expression of it. For a moment I dreaded the thought that the dance would end, after which the normal apartheid would resume that covers so much of the world's social scene. I wondered, while we danced, whether the universal apartheid, that made no sense at this moment, had been invented in distant ages in order to prevent this kind of echo of ourselves in the flow of touching one another, and in the deep satisfaction that it stirs within the sense of wonder, which is resulting in the profound realization that we do indeed all stand side by side as human beings. The broader unfolding of this realization would have endangered any imperial structure. It seemed to me that the death penalty had been needed in ancient times to enforce the apartheid in its early stages. It seemed to me that the death penalty was later relaxed when the apartheid had become self-enforcing in countless different ways, just as the Brahmanic genocide became apparently a self-enforcing impetus in distant ages in India. The woman who I danced with told me between songs that her name is Mariolona. She invited me to continue to dance with her for a few more songs. I told her my name with a smile, and assured her that one more dance would be heaven, and then another, and still another, and that they would cement that heaven in place in my memories. Her smile, in reply, lit up the dim of the dance floor. It seemed to me that our dancing was happening not on a dance floor, really, but in Helen's lateral lattice of human hearts, all linked to one another by strands of love, through which we find a reflection of ourselves in one another, as we share a common universal humanity, and a common universal human soul, that come to light in us in our unique individuality. It seemed as if the flow of our dancing was carrying us ever deeper into a nameless exploration of ourselves in the flow of the light of these fibers of love of the lateral lattice. At the end of the sixth dance we returned to the little table to where Sylvia and the Spanish man, who gave his name as Alejo, had just come back to themselves, equally as exhausted as we were. "That's the trouble with this place," Alejo commented. "It wears a fellow out." He suggested that we might all find the atmosphere more relaxing at Aladdin's Palace, down the street, where the music is quiet, and the atmosphere more intimate and conducive for conversation. We all simply nodded. Alejo was right, Aladdin's Palace was quiet. What the Temple of Unrequited Love lacked on decor, Aladdin's Palace had in abundance. We entered an oriental world that spoke of 1,000 tales of sun-drenched deserts, gilded palaces, snake charmers, pirates selling priceless treasures for a song amidst adventures in silk, interwoven with images of flying carpets. The music fitted the atmosphere created by the decoration. It took one out of the present into a magical realm of a distant age that existed only in the shadows of imaginary tales. The drinks, though, were from the present world. Still, the Grand Marnier seemed exotic enough to apply to both worlds. "Let me tell you a tale," said Sylvia, in which the kind of dancing that I had experienced here would have made a world of a difference. Mariolona suggested that the place we were in was perfect for storytelling. Alejo agreed. So it was that Sylvia leaned back and began by saying that her story appeared to have been from an equally distant age, though she had heard the story being told quite recently in a theater in China. She said that the story had come to mind while she and Alejo were dancing. She said that her tale is about a tragedy that resulted from the lack of a wider vision and has something to do with one being able to see both sides of a coin before its face value can be determined. "That's the issue here in our present world," she said, "isn't it?" She added that this is something that very few people are able to do, or do well. She said, the tale has something to do with that, and with the goodness of living and its fragility. She told us the story. The tale is that of a woman who had married a princely man, both by stature and by intelligence, and also by his manly looks and strength. But the man was not a prince. He was a soldier, and, as a soldier he was killed in war, like many others, in countless wars. However, the woman who mourned for him carried their child. In time the child was born, and grew up in her arms, and became a beautiful boy, wrapped in the tenderness of her care and her love. As the boy grew older, he displayed ever more of the attributes of his father, so that the woman's love for him became the very reason for her living. She longed for no other love. Her life was fulfilled in the happiness of those years. Then came the years of famine. The boy was 12. A great migration began that many people undertook in the hope that they might escape the worst of the famine. She and her son were among them. One day, in the throng of the escape, her son was stolen from her side. Many children were stolen in those days to become laborers for somebody else. Grief-stricken to the deepest recesses of her soul, the woman refused to marry again. She had many suitors, since she was attractive as a person, and still young. But her heart was too heavy with grief and fear. She feared that she would not survive another lost love. She felt it would be better not to love again, than having to bear the pain of losing once more all that she had lived for. Instead of marrying, she made it her quest to find her lost boy. As the years passed, however, her fading hope weakened her heart. She became more and more hateful and trusted no one. She hated especially the people who stole. Unfortunately, as the times were hard, many people resorted to stealing from one another. Indeed, she herself had suffered hunger on several occasions when thieves had broken into her home and had stolen her living. As time went by, the villagers set up patrols to protect themselves from the thieves, nor did they deal kindly with whoever got caught. One day, the woman herself encountered a thief. She confronted the man on the spot, right in her own cottage. She screamed at him, but realized there was no one nearby to offer her help. Without wasting a moment, she confronted the man in a rage of upwelling anger, and grasped a knife and thrust it in him without thinking. It all happened in a flash of a whirlwind of uncontrollable emotions. Moments later, the man lay on the floor in pain, grasping at his stomach, gasping for air, asking her for forgiveness. As she kneeled down to him, she noticed a birthmark under his left ear that identified him as her son. She saw the birthmark as she lifted his head off the floor to give him a cup of water, which he had requested. The birthmark was uncommon. It was the same as that of her son. She embraced her son while he died. She knew she would have embraced him for his whole life, even as a thief. She would have cried for him and let her love heal him. Now she could cry no more. How would the dancing have made a difference in that story? Asked Alejo, after a few moments of silence. No, said Sylvia. I won't tell you how it would make a difference. You have it within you to know that answer yourself. So, let me challenge you to tell it to me. Unconditional, universal love is not an easy thing, commented Mariolona. We may never pass the test. This means we must be patient and gentle with one another if we fail. I nodded and hugged her for the answer. In order to give Alejo some time to respond to Sylvia, I told everybody that I had a story of my own to tell. I had heard the story told in Baghdad. It's from a time long before the caliphates came to be, and from before the great empires that preceded them. From this distant time, a story is kept alive about one of the early kings. Among the families of the kings was a wise prince who in time became king himself. As king, he ruled in an oppressed kingdom that was kept under the thumb of the mightiest empire in that region. But even while still being a prince, the royal heir developed a great love for his kingdom and his people. His love was such that it had also inspired his people's love for one another. Later, after he became the ruler of the land, he hired the best poets and musicians that he could find to compose songs of love with such purity and power as would be needed to inspire a revolution for the freedom of the kingdom from its imperial oppressor. It turned out that the revolution succeeded. The people became free. Except, in the euphoria of their freedom, the songs of love that had inspired them to grasp their freedom had drifted into the background, and soon vanished from sight and from their mind. Other songs, songs of greed, replaced them. In their greed, the people became oppressors themselves, of one another, and this in more cruel ways than the imperial oppressors had oppressed them before. It was in this period of darkness that a holy man started to sing the old songs again before the king. He sang them without a comment and without a prayer, as none of these were needed since the king understood the message of the holy person. But who of the people of the kingdom would sing those songs again? The king asked the holy man. He received no answer. He longed to know if it was possible once more for anyone in the kingdom to inspire the people with songs of love for freedom in the darkness of their deepest depression, when the darkness of their depression was so deep that it was deemed to be light and freedom. The king received no answer to his questions. He determined that new songs should be written, but who of his people could write such songs in the darkness of the perversion that the people considered a panacea? As it turned out, the king never found the answer to his puzzle. He died shortly thereafter by the sword of an assassin. The king took the puzzle with him to his grave. The question, thus, remains still to be answered. Shall the same be said of us? Said Sylvia. Perhaps it was too late in the story to write the new songs after the perversion had gone too deep, I replied. Perhaps those new songs should have been written at the moment of victory that gave the kingdom its freedom. The new songs, then, should have raised the curtain still higher to inspire bonds of love in which people reach out to enrich one another's life. Maybe there comes a point when it is too late to compose those songs and to sing them. Maybe it is too late for us to do the same today in our world, as we face the gravest crisis in history. Still, we must not give up hope. There always remains some hope if we uplift ourselves high enough, because the principles for gaining freedom and building a bright new world are forever the same, from the beginning of time, and forevermore, waiting to be discovered and to be applied. They are as valid today as they have been for all times. Whatever human breakthroughs we expect to be possible in the future will be possible there because they were possible in the past. And so they are possible now. This means that your story too needs to be rewritten, said Mariolona. I nodded and told everyone still another story to give us time to rewrite the endings that need to be rewritten. I told the story of a king whose people had become enslaved in another kingdom. They became enslaved in the very kingdom in which they had found refuge in earlier times, when a great famine had parched their land. As guests, they were honored at first, but soon they became slaves, and becoming slaves, they were badly treated, especially in later years. Because of their now endless anguish, their own king found a way to free them from the land of their enslavers. By his wisdom, diplomacy, and spiritual leadership, a great exodus was arranged. However, as the people left the land of their enslavers, on the way out, they began to riot and liberally loot their previous host to the point that they now possess great properties in gold and jewels. As one might expect, they became corrupted by their golden properties. They created idols of gold. And as the idols grew, their humanity became lost. They became worse than their masters had been. As a consequence, the king who had rescued them led them deep into a desert and kept them there for 30 years until the older generation had all died, whose property ideology had prevented the people from forming a viable new nation. Only after the purge was complete were the people allowed to go on and become a nation. That's the story of the Israelis, said Sylvia. If you refer to the state of Israel, the answer is no, I said to her. If the state of Israel continues to pursue the path it has chosen, which is in some ways worse than that of their former oppressors, the state of Israel will destroy itself and its people with it. However, this is not what my story is about. My story is that of the Israelites' exit from Egypt in ancient times. The king is Moses. According to scriptures, Moses kept the Israelites in a desert for 30 years, or 30 days, until the corrupted people had died, for the reason that the story explained. Apparently the people had corrupted themselves too deeply for any practical redemption to be possible. Sylvia nodded her head. That's the challenge we face today, isn't it? She asked. We must ask ourselves if we are not already beyond the point of no return in our nuclear-armed world, wrecked with insanity and mired in reductionist thinking, for any practical redemption to happen that would allow us to create a new renaissance or even an Ice Age renaissance. I explained the Ice Age renaissance part. What do you think, Peter? Asked Mariolona when I finished talking. Has today's society already regressed beyond the point of any hope of becoming human again? I suggested that this question needs to be asked again and again. I suggested, however, that we have the tools today, mental tools, the likes of which hadn't been developed in Moses' time. We have the scientific intellectual tradition of 2,500 years of humanist development to support us, with principles established that Moses might not even have dreamed of. By utilizing the best of this tradition, society becomes indeed redeemable. Just look at us today, said Sylvia. Peter and I have come to realize that two opposite models exist for people relating to one another, which we have recognized as a vertical and a lateral model. This world of two opposite models, for relating to one another, reflects itself in the existence of also two opposite models for marriage. As a society, we have lived under an imperial vertical or hierarchical model for centuries. We have built on this model a hierarchical society. We have recognized this model to be imperial and fascist in nature, as it was required for supporting a hierarchical society. The present marriage doctrine was developed under this vertical model that evidently precedes Moses. This model isolates and divides society universally into the smallest possible spheres and creates an environment of tension. It represents all the features of the imperial vertical model. It renders the human being small, weak, even evil and impotent, and of such a low quality that society is deemed to be in need to be ruled over by a superior sovereign or an elite authority such as the church. This imperial vertical model reflects itself in a marriage model that is extremely small and confined, encumbered with ironclad limits, supposedly to confine the evil tendency of the human being within the smallest sphere of private living, especially in the sexual domain. By this process, the whole of society became fractured, privatized, and isolated. That has been done so that society won't interfere with the hierarchical system, but becomes a part of it. That is what we see today on the political horizon. However, the entire imperial vertical model, and the mythology that it rests on, is a perversion of what is true about the human being and our humanity. The natural model for mankind relating to one another reflects a society of human beings existing laterally side by side, and by no means as little entities. In the lateral model, we discover ourselves as the tallest species of life in the universe, endowed with incredible capacities and potential for good in our self-development. By this natural lateral model, each human being comes to light, like a sun, with incredible brilliance, enriching the universe with light and life. "I see what you are getting at," said Mariolona. "If we live by the lateral model, then our love for one another doesn't unfold with the kind of the gravity of a black hole in space, as it does in today's world, and as it did in Moses' world. Instead, our love radiates outward from its infinite base, enveloping the universe. That's something that Moses probably wasn't aware of as being possible to happen, and few today are. With that kind of love, we can win our peace and freedom in today's precarious world that is identical to the one that Moses once faced, and for the same reason. Therefore, our solution is also the solution for the Moses story. That is how we would rewrite this story from a scientific standpoint." I applauded her. "That is also how we save civilization and mankind from an ice age collapse," I added. "We don't have the option today that Moses applied to purge the corruption from society by letting the people die with it. The ice age is too close. We are running out of time already. We need to commit ourselves to a 100-year scientific, technological, and economic development cycle as a means for maintaining the global food supply in indoors facilities. If this development is delayed, while we wait for corruption to die out with the death of a corrupt society, the Ice Age might overwhelm us before we are ready. We need to start the Ice Age Renaissance now." Alejo just shook his head. "I know what you are thinking," said Sylvia. "Forget global warming. The global warming doctrine is a scientific fraud designed to hide the fact that we face the return of the Ice Age within 100 years, or slightly more. The imperial goal is to prevent the necessary Ice Age Renaissance, in which no empire would survive. They would sooner incur the destruction of 9/10 of mankind than let their imperial status become endangered. They own us, lock, stock, and barrel, just as the kings of old owned those people. But Alejo, I think we can foil their game this time and save mankind from an otherwise certain doom. Pete and I are committed to that." "Are you saying that this lateral model for human relationships, in which we all stand laterally side by side, also reflects itself in a corresponding marriage model?" interrupted Mariolona and hugged me. The principle of universal love doesn't eradicate the marriage concept, as one might expect, I said to Mariolona. It doesn't destroy anything. It uplifts the marriage concept and makes it all-inclusive, or at least more inclusive. Only the ironclad boundaries fall away, which presently isolate us from one another universally. If we make an effort to allow ourselves to live like human beings in full acknowledgement of our common humanity and our common universal divine soul, then we have nothing to hide and to confine, for which boundaries would be needed. In this lateral universal context, the marriage model represents an infinite and progressive idea, a seed kernel for human development, and the boundless embrace of the whole of humanity. It becomes universal in scope. It becomes a universal marriage. It is no longer inward-looking then, like a black hole that draws everything unto itself, as in today's world of universal privatization, replied Mariolona. Universal love and universal privatization are opposites by intent, aren't they? The concept of marriage, as universal marriage, reflecting the principle of universal love, appears to be designed to function like a sun, said Sylvia. It is designed to envelop the universe with light, and with the warmth of our love for our universal humanity. It becomes outflowing, and ever-expanding. I see a universal marriage unfolding where the specific form of a people's relationship to one another no longer matters, where the form of relationships gives way to the principles of respect for one another as human beings, to honor kindness, generosity, and love in its highest sense, to uplift civilization, and make the world in which we live a richer and brighter place. Are you saying that by embracing this natural universal marriage platform, we can step away from the threshold of no return and find a way to rescue our civilization? Alejo replied. We could have an accidentally unfolding nuclear war tomorrow. I think that would be the doom of mankind for all times to come, I interjected, as it would destroy the chief resource for our needed Ice Age Renaissance. A large, highly developed, and economically well-functioning society is required for starting that renaissance. If this resource is destroyed, it's game over for mankind. We are certainly justified to call today's preparation for nuclear war suicidal insanity. Unfortunately, nuclear war is what society is after. We are like the people in the kingdom who thought that their darkness is light, and their self-enslavement is the mark of freedom. The Cold War has been well named, said Mariolona. We have become stone cold towards one another and ourselves as a society that calls itself human beings. But how do we change the ending of Peter's story of the king who saw no hope and could find no one to write the new songs of love and freedom that needed to be written? Considering how precarious our present world situation is, we might have already stepped past the point of no return to where a rescue of ourselves is no longer possible. I told everybody that this very question about the threshold of no return had already been asked in ancient times. One finds traces of it in the earliest scriptures. I referred to the Abraham story in which Abraham argued this very point in a dialogue with God. The argument was about the impending destruction of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. God suggested to Abraham that if 50 righteous people could be found in these cities, the cities and the societies in them would survive. Abraham wasn't that optimistic. He suggested to God that if perhaps only 20 upright people were to be found, would that not suffice? God agreed that this might be sufficient. Abraham asked again, what if there were only 10? God agreed again that this might possibly suffice. As it was, those 10 didn't exist, and the cities were self-destroyed. The societies within them had lost their conditioning to survive. This imaginary dialogue of Abraham with God, I said, explores the question that the king had asked, wondering if the needed new songs of freedom and love could be written by a corrupted people who considered their corruption into fascism to be a state of freedom and love. Mariolona suggested that the threshold seems to depend on the quality of the breakthrough that can be achieved. I suggested to her that if a village below a dam that is breaking up were to contain one single person, who can inspire all the others to open their eyes to the reality of their situation, whereby this single person would break the denial of everyone's belief in a security that doesn't exist, then the actions of this one person would prove to be sufficient to cause a movement in everyone's consciousness by which the village could be saved. Because then the whole society would join hands to repair the dam or to fortify the village. That's a kind of universal marriage, isn't it? Sylvia interjected. It all depends on igniting that spark of the principle of universal love that inspires the right actions, interjected Mariolona. Universal love begins with the focus on the advantage of the other, said Sylvia. Nothing more than that is needed in the village behind the dam than this spark of universal love that marshals the needed resources to save the village. Sylvia suggested that the villagers might join hands to rebuild the dam, or drain the reservoir, or build a flood channel to protect the village when the dam breaks. She also suggested that none of that could possibly happen until the threshold is crossed by people in getting out of their state of denial of reality, which presently isolates the whole of mankind from its humanity, and from each other, as we see it almost everywhere today. Sylvia turned to Alejo. Have you figured out yet how my story of the woman who lost her son should have been written differently? That's a hard nut to crack, isn't it? Not for me it is, Alejo replied, and grinned. The story is a simple one, and so is the answer. The story tells us that a great famine erupted from which the people fled. In the course of fleeing, the boy was abducted. What does this tell us about the people of that society? It tells us that the people were sloppy, small-minded, a bunch of thieves and slavers. A famine is never an act of nature, but the result of stupidity. They knew that the possibility for a famine was perpetually on the horizon, but they made no preparations for it. They might have built sufficient water supply infrastructures to water their fields. They also might have built storehouses to cover the deficiencies that would be incurred in their years ravished by pests. Obviously they didn't do that, just as Peter suggests we still fail to do today, in preparing our world for the coming ice age. And the reason for the people's failure in this story, as far as I can tell, is not any bigger than their isolation and division from one another as human beings. That isolation is evident by the fact that they stole from one another and enslaved one another. Isn't that the story of our present world? This means that the entire story starts out wrong, and of course by natural consequence it ends wrong. It probably reflects metaphorically mankind's entrance into the Ice Age, under such conditions as we have today, in which 9/10 of mankind would perish to the point that even the whole of mankind becomes extinct. I wouldn't rewrite the ending of that story, Alejo continued. I would rewrite the story at the very beginning, and would establish within that society a copy of the Temple of Unrequited Love, as we find it across the street, and I would have it established with the same banner strung from wall to wall displaying the house rule, that each person shall dance with a stranger. This temple would heal the society's lack of their love for each other. End of story. The rest would be a non-event not worthy of any special mention. It would be the same with the resumption of the Ice Age, in a well-prepared and well-functioning society. What do you mean with saying, would be, I cut him off? Shouldn't you have said, will be? The thought of facing the Ice Age unprepared is unthinkable. The consequence would be unthinkable. But that's what we are heading for, said Alejo. Our humanity is too deep and too profound that we would fail ourselves by not creating the Ice Age Renaissance, I almost protested. We will create the needed indoor agriculture that can support a 10 billion population. I see no movement in this direction, said Alejo. The movement starts today, interjected Sylvia. Let me tell you a story which is true, said Mariolona. It is also a story for which the ending does not need to be rewritten, which only needs to be extended. The story is not about foreign lands. It begins right here in America. It begins barely a few hundred miles to the north of where we are, in a small town in New Hampshire, in Concord, I think. It happened one day less than 100 years ago that a woman lived in that town who was literally at the end of her rope. The woman was partially paralyzed and destitute. Her home life was in shambles to the point that it had become unbearable. She had decided one day to leave her home and never come back. As she hobbled to the railway station, she met a crowd of people streaming the other way. While the people were passing by in the opposite direction, she reasoned that they must have come for something important. Why else would so many people come? With this thought, she turned around and followed them as best as she could. She came to a wide-open homestead at the edge of the town, where she saw the crowds assembled, being addressed by a woman speaking to the people from a balcony. She drew near to listen, but having been slow in coming, she stood far in the back, too far to hear what was being said. She began to cry, for this once more added disappointment to the long train of disappointments that had been the story of her life. She felt that something important was being said, that she now missed. When the people dispersed, she hobbled back into town. It happened on her way back that as she crossed the street towards a vacant lot on the other side, that she noticed a team of horses approaching. She stepped aside and watched. As the horses and the carriage passed by, she saw the same woman riding in the carriage that she had seen speaking from the balcony. She saw the woman looking at her with a warm and radiant expression. However, what she saw in that woman's face was more than just a radiance of emotions. It was a flow of love that defies description. She said later of that incident that she had never seen that kind of love in any human face before or since, or had known such love to be possible. She had also discovered that by the time the carriage had driven out of sight, that her paralysis had vanished. She was free, healed, and completely whole like any other human being. She returned to her home with joy, and found her home situation healed as well. According to the woman's testimony, said Mariolona, the incident really happened. But also something else had happened along this line. It happened long before this day, almost 4 decades earlier. This part is even more profound, added Mariolona. In another town in this same general era, this time in Massachusetts, the woman had slipped on an icy street and fallen. According to the doctor, she had suffered a spinal injury, which they said would become fatal. As her situation worsened, and she seemed near the end of her days, she began to reason about the nature of universal principles. She reasoned that the healing works of Christ Jesus couldn't have been miracles, since miracles don't happen in the real world. So she reasoned that they must have resulted from the operation of universal principles that caused the massive healing work to be possible that Christ Jesus had accomplished so long ago. She reasoned that if this was the case, which it obviously was, then the same principles would be still as valid in her time as they had been 18 centuries earlier. The remarkable thing was that while she reasoned along these lines, she found herself suddenly well. She was healed on the spot, on the very day that her minister had figured would be her last. The minister had seen her in the morning that day, in a hopeless state, and had promised to return after his service, to prepare her for her death. When he returned, she was up and about, completely well, and opened the door for him. She devoted her life from that time on to discovering and exploring the science of the principles and processes that had caused her healing, which she later called Christian Science. The woman lived for another 44 years, said Mariolona. She wrote a textbook about the science that she created, and set up a college for teaching the discovered principles of scientific mental healing. The process became widely practiced by many people in healing others. The woman also created a church to promote her created healing practice. Historians also tell us that she set a portion of each day aside for the healing of the ills of the world. That woman was the woman in the carriage that had been seen by the paralyzed woman who was healed that day, in the flow of a deeply embracing love, said Mariolona. In fact, so great was her love for mankind that she gave up her beloved country home at her homestead outside the small town at the age of 86, and moved to Boston to launch a newspaper with a mission to bless all mankind and to injure none. However, more profoundly than this accomplishment was the rarely recognized fact that when the woman died in December 1910, She left behind a world that had been at peace for over 40 years, for the first time in centuries, corresponding to the period of her healing practice beginning in 1866. All the wars and long-standing atrocities had ended at this time, including the American Civil War and the British Opium Wars against China. Even the religious wars against humanity by the Ecclesiastical Inquisition, which had reigned since the 1400s with terror, torture, and burning people to death, had come to an end just prior to this time. The train of atrocities and war did not get restarted until a few years after her death, beginning around the start of World War I, nor has the train stopped rolling since. Alejo shook his head in disbelief at the ending of Marianona's story. "You must be mistaken," he said to her. I intervened and told him that Marianona was right about the historic timing. I confirmed that the only major period of peace between 1510 and the present occurred during the period that Marianona had mentioned. From 1510 onward, the world had been subjected to a continuous state of war, I said in defense of Marianona. It began with the League of Cambrai aiming to wipe out the Venetian Empire. The empire retaliated with staging an atrocious religious war that wiped out the Golden Renaissance. The retaliation became a string of wars that culminated into the 30 Years' War that ended only with the dawn of the Second Renaissance built on the Treaty of Westphalia. The founding of the USA came out of this background. But even at this time, while Europe celebrated its new achievement of peace and its profound renaissance, the Spanish Inquisition still ravished the human landscape and darkened the face of civilization, though to a lesser degree, for a few short years. Also, the world saw a new series of wars erupting in the shadow of the 1688 invasion of England by the Dutch Prince William of Orange, who brought the Venetian imperial system to Britain. Out of that erupted the British Imperial War to deny America's independence, followed by the Imperials' Jacobean terror operations in France, followed in turn by the Napoleonic Wars that racked Europe, and a string of smaller attacks on America culminating in the American Civil War. But the entire train of war madness stopped around 1866. The Civil War had ended the year before. The Opium Wars against China had ended. Even the Spanish Inquisition had been finally abolished a few years earlier. No major wars ravished the world from 1866 on, until World War I erupted in 1914 and brought to an end almost a half a century of peace. At this point all hell broke loose again, and the wars haven't stopped since. World War I started a few years after the woman's death, said Marianona. History tells us that the train of atrocities against mankind had been halted for the period in which the kind of love for mankind that the woman represented was put on the table. Peter is right. The train of atrocities was restarted and put onto the fast track. Right after that, beginning with World War I, the war train was rolling. And it hasn't stopped since. I am not saying with that the woman in my story was responsible for that remarkable period of peace. I merely find it remarkable that this historic coincidence exists between the woman's profound love based on scientific principles and its expression in a period of profound mental healing in many parts of the world, with all that coming together into a remarkable period of peace that interrupted a 500-year period of war and inhumanity. The coincidence of these three historic occurrences tells me that a principle is involved in all that, said Marianona, and that therefore the ending of my story has not yet been written. The story says something to me about the power of love, as an awesome impetus that can shape human history in a profound way. It also tells me that the train of atrocities against mankind can be stopped again, once society dedicates itself to the task of developing a living that is as wide as the world, because the principle of universal love, which Peter has mentioned, is a timeless principle. Nor do we need another pioneer in the world to demonstrate this principle for us. One demonstration is enough, because we have the capacity to carry the process forward by ourselves. I would say that my story is the answer that the king in Peter's story was looking for, which no one could give him, since the principles hadn't been discerned at the time. I also think that our dancing in the temple of unrequited love has something to do with this process, because it seems to have a healing and enriching effect on our love for one another. That's what I think is also the ending for the story of our present world. That will yet be written, said Mariolona. Naturally, I applauded her. Sylvia and Alejo joined me. Let me tell you an even bigger story, said Sylvia, and began to grin. This story pales all the stories that were told here tonight. This story is so big that it is absolutely unbelievable. It is a gigantic story. It is so big that it contains the answer to all the other stories that were told tonight. And the most amazing part is that it is the story of just a single day, and this day is today. With this, Sylvia began to tell her side of the story of our struggles that began with the thunderstorm in the morning. She touched on everything, including her escape to the gallery, and what followed there. Nothing is bigger in this world than this, she said in the end, than the tragedy of the isolation of mankind from one another as human beings, and stepping away from this tragedy to the recognition of the complementary attraction and complementary protection of men and women as the reality of our being that reflects the operating principles of the universe. Nothing is bigger than a civilization without isolation, except perhaps the daunting challenge to acknowledge this reality. This single, insignificant seeming principle is so big that it contains all by itself the key for creating a civilization without empire. It contains the answer to all the hopes and aspirations and struggles of mankind of the last 5 millennia or more. It holds the key to purging the world of empire and building a human civilization. This is the key to the end of war, for without empire there is no war. This is also the key to the end of poverty, starvation, slavery, inhumanity, fascism, thievery, for these are the hallmarks of empire created by empire for the maintenance of its illegitimate existence, which will thereby end. Mark this day on your calendar, said Sylvia, and raised her glass, for this day will stand in future history as the turning point towards a new age in the development of mankind that now lies before us. We didn't just applaud her. We cheered her with our own glasses held high. Now it is my turn to tell you a story, another big story, said Alejo. My story is likewise a real story, and it is likewise a story that probably no one has ever told you before, because it is a forbidden story, a secret story, that one can get arrested for if one tells it too loudly. It is a story of universal attraction between opposites, like the attraction between men and women. It is also the most universal story that is centered in the universe itself. There, the attracting animus is gravity. Gravity is a force of attraction that any form of mass exerts on any other form of mass. It is the force with which the sun has a hold on the earth, and the earth has a hold on the moon, and the moon has a hold on the waters of the oceans, whereby it creates tidal actions. Gravity is the most widely observed nuclear force there is. The apple that hits you on the head when you sit under an apple tree is propelled by gravity. It is the same force that also holds the distant microplanet, Pluto, in its orbit over a distance of more than 7 billion kilometers. The irony is that no one in the field of theoretical physics knows what causes the phenomena of mass, and what causes its attraction to one another. There we have Pluto, being 500 times smaller than the Earth, and 30 times as far away from the Sun, being held in place by the Sun's gravity, just as we are. No physical link exists between the Sun and the planet, except gravity, that can be measured, but which no one can define. The best definition that I came across is that its effect is purely the outcome of intention, of the incredible intelligence that has constructed the universe. Are you saying that this attracting force of intention is also reflected in mankind, between men and women? I interjected. Well, isn't this what the evidence indicates? Said Alejo. Sylvia laughed. Why would you call this a secret story? The whole of humanity feels this effect. What's so secret about that? The secrecy begins in the second part of my story, said Alejo. The secret is that gravity is universal. Nothing that has mass, throughout the entire universe, is not affected by it. What's so secret about that? Sylvia said again. That's why the phenomenon is called universal gravity. The revolutionary secrecy is that plasma is attracted by gravity too, said Alejo. Plasma is a soup of free-flowing atomic particles, primarily protons and electrons, which carry an electric charge. The charge is negative for electrons and positive for protons. On Earth, these particles are found almost exclusively bound to each other in two structures called atoms that thereby become electrically neutral, which, by their dynamic interaction, also become 100,000 times larger in size and thereby become visible, especially when they are bunched together into molecules like apples in a basket. But in space, the protons and electrons are not visible. They are free-flowing, disorganized, and are 100,000 times smaller than anything that we have on Earth. Nevertheless, they have the same mass and the same gravitational attraction, and they carry an electric charge. Incomplete atoms also carry an electric charge, like ionized gases, which are therefore also classified as plasma. Plasma is an invisible electric energy carrier. This makes it also an invisible electric conductor in space. A whopping 99.999% of all the mass in the universe is deemed to exist in this invisible, plasma state. Here the secret begins. While all of this is knowable, the knowledge is not allowed. And why isn't it allowed? Said Sylvia. If it was allowed, the knowledge would mess up all the political power structures in the world, said Alejo. Of course, it cannot be hidden forever. Sooner or later some honest scientists will look at our solar system that is teeming with plasma and will conclude that this free-flowing plasma is being attracted to every source of gravity that is nearby, like the planets and the sun, especially the latter. An honest scientist will conclude, for example, that the attraction of all plasma in and around the solar system is towards the sun, flowing into it. That's only natural, because in comparison with the planets, 99.8% of all the mass in the solar system is located in the sun itself. The sun is therefore the main attractor, and it has a vast sphere of plasma surrounding it to draw from. And that's what it does. It attracts plasma. As the plasma flows towards the sun, the plasma becomes increasingly compacted. However, there is a law in the universe that states that when the protons and the electrons, which normally attract each other, come extremely close to each other, they begin to repel each other. They begin to isolate each other into a double-layer relationship that creates electric current sheets. We call this in plasma physics the phenomenon of charge separation. As the compaction increases further, tension builds up between the double layer. From a certain point on, the tension becomes so great that electric arc discharges happen that reduce the tension momentarily. When the compaction process is strongly dynamic, the electric arcing process takes place in a continuous stream, causing a continuous luminance on the wide spectrum, from deep red, including dark heat, all the way to the extreme ultraviolet. And this happens right across the entire double-layer sheet. This is in essence what illumines our sun to its immense brilliance. The double-layer sheet powers the photosphere. It heats up quite nicely in this process to a temperature of 5,800 degrees. In some rare cases, when the compaction reaches an extreme intensity and strong magnetic factors from extreme current flows interact with the double-layer sheet, the whole thing simply explodes. In such cases, large chunks of the double-layer plasma, some as much as 50,000 kilometers wide, explode. As a result, a portion of the photosphere explodes into space, which we observe as the solar flares. The sunspot then leaves a hole in the photosphere that exposes the cooler, deeper layer underneath, that is 2,000 degrees colder. And this, my friends, is the secret that you are not supposed to know. Sylvia shook her head. Can't you guess the reason? Said Alejo. Just imagine how it would upset the political world if this secret became widely known and acknowledged. It would trash the concept of the sun being heated by a nuclear fusion furnace. And thank God it would. It would get us back into the real world, where such nonsense doesn't happen. The universe doesn't need nuclear fusion to power itself. It has got a more efficient power system going. it is electrically powered. We need to stop the belief that the sun is powered by hydrogen bombs going off continuously deep within its interior, and open our eyes to what is really happening," Sylvia interjected, pointing a finger at me. "Did I say this right?" she added. I nodded. "Knowing this wouldn't change the world," I said. "Most people probably don't believe this old fairy tale of the fusion-powered sun anyway, since they can't see with their own eyes that the sun isn't heated from the inside." I turned to Alejo. "I think Sylvia agrees with you that the sunspots would be brighter instead of darker if the sun was heated from within. Anyone with a good backyard telescope can see that this isn't the case, that instead the sunspots are darker, meaning that the sun is darker on the inside, beneath its electrically heated surface." Sure, the defender of the fusion sun theory, which is no longer really a secret, but a lie, will defend their fairy tale with convoluted explanations until the cows come home, arguing that white is black. But this argumentation isn't world-shaking anymore, is it? "You have to look further," said Alejo. "Just imagine that people would put 2 and 2 together and start to ask themselves what this means for the Earth. They would note that the Earth is orbiting close to the sun, and thereby orbits in a highly compacted field of plasma. They would reason that if the sun is powered electrically, which has an estimated energy output of 400 billion megawatts, the equivalent of 400 million billion nuclear power complexes, and they would further note that the Earth is orbiting right through the supply line for this huge energy converting engine, since the Earth is located at a point where the supply is already highly compacted. Wouldn't people, by realizing this, then begin to realize that mankind would be able to meet its entire modest little energy needs for all times to come by simply tapping into this immense galactic source that supplies the solar energy? Sure, the gravity of the Earth is far too little for the Earth to light up with its own photosphere, but we do have an equivalent, the ionosphere, that serves as an interface to the galactic electricity flow. We see the evidence right here in Washington. The lightning that hits the Earth originates in the ionosphere. The thunder clouds with their high-reaching convection currents, though they don't reach right into the ionosphere, are charged by it. The connection has been visually observed. Every thunderbolt that you see hitting the ground testifies that there is a lot of power up there that's ready for us to tap into. And beyond that, there is also a magnetically organized plasma sphere surrounding the Earth. The bottom line is that we don't need any of the archaic crap that we presently use for electricity generating, like coal, oil, or nuclear power, not to mention the insanity of windmills and solar collectors. Just imagine, all the oil wars would end, whereby the power of empire would end. Even the controversy over nuclear power would end. Pollution would end. The biofuel swindle would end. All the hoopla that we now see around the world that is focused on creating a primitive energy-lean, starving, deindustrialized planet would suddenly end, as its flimsy excuses would simply evaporate. Sylvia looked at me and smiled. "Didn't you say something like that earlier?" she said to me. "Oh, it gets better still," said Alejo. "The intense electric activity on the surface of the sun creates also the phenomenon of the solar winds. The solar winds are plasma showers extending outward to a distance way beyond Pluto. The plasma winds are electrically accelerated to extremely high velocities, somewhere between 200 and 1,000 kilometers per second. Their outward pressure creates the heliosphere, which extends past Pluto, where it meets up with the interstellar medium and comes to a halt. The stopping of the plasma flow creates a kind of shock front that forms a protective barrier against cosmic radiation. We know that the heliosphere strongly attenuates the cosmic rays, which is significant for the Earth, since the cosmic rays are the chief cause for cloud formation, as they ionize the troposphere. The intensity of this interaction is so great that it causes the ice ages on Earth, if the cosmic radiation is strong. This happens when the heliosphere, that shields us, becomes weak. And it does become weaker when the electric intensity of the currents feeding the sun become weaker. Then the solar winds become weaker, and the heliosphere shrinks. Right now it is shrinking. Also the sunspot cycles are getting weaker. We may be in the transition zone to the next ice age glaciation cycle. Do you think this is big enough to scare the hell out of the rulers of the world? You bet it is. While it is possible, with a great renaissance, to build up the economy of the world to produce the infrastructure for indoor agriculture, this needed renaissance is not allowed to happen, as any renaissance is poison to the existence of empire. This is the evident reason why the entire scientific discipline of a plasma-powered sun is buried under blankets of denial so deep that not a word will get to your ears unless you hear it from someone who is fighting this censorship. "Didn't you tell me much of the same thing?" said Sylvia to me. "I just didn't hear you then. I guess I need to be told twice. But you are right. This is big. This is as big as the survival of the whole of mankind, or 90% of it." "That is why it is hidden," said Alejo. "That is why it is a secret. It may be dangerous to even talk about this." "There is one aspect that is not dangerous," I interjected. "I beg to differ," said Alejo. "Everything that's connected with this particular aspect of fundamental truth puts you into a dangerous position if you focus on it." "No, it doesn't," I said. "There is one aspect of it that falls outside of the scope of the dangerous." "And what might this be?" said Alejo. "Your acknowledgement that gravity is attracting plasma by its mass and causes it to be flowing into the sun has a social correlative, as you said so yourself," I answered with a smile. "This can't be dangerous. It's beautiful. Plasma is made up of two electric complements, protons and electrons, or men and women, on the social scene. While they attract each other, sexual intimacy rarely happens. However, their attraction becomes more intense in proportion as the plasma becomes denser. In the social context, as the humanist energy is increasing, the sexual intimacies become more intimate too. Not necessarily physically, but the relationships become brighter. As the intimacy becomes ever more powerful, sex becomes physical and unfolds ever more widely spread, as the double layer becomes ever more pronounced, with natural arcing taking place across it, according to the power intensity in the system. This means that sexual intensity in society is really a yardstick of the intensity of the humanist power in the system. The more widely spread the sexual proliferation becomes, the more powerful will the civilization be that is reflected thereby. This tells me that increased sexual proliferation is a healthy sign for society. History seems to bear this out. Many of the great men in leading-edge positions, like Benjamin Franklin, are being slandered for having had mistresses in their life. The coincidence appears to be healthy, if not unavoidable, no matter what the religions say about it, and the public opinions that the religions produce. "Are you trying to tell me that this isn't dangerous?" Alejo interjected. "This may be one of the reasons why the sexual circumcision is so powerfully destructive to civilization, and why it is so intensely promoted by the masters of empire, especially in our country, Peter, which happens to be the historic archenemy of the British Empire that tried to destroy our republic the moment it was born. Tell me that exposing this connection isn't dangerous." "You are touching on something that goes to the very core of empire, that hates the humanist fire in society with a passion, and tries to quench it by every means possible. And they've done a good job at it. Everything has been made cheap. Honest sexual attraction has become rare. Sex has been drawn into the realm of games, exploitation, domination, isolation, enslavement, lust." "Right, who even thinks about enriching one another?" I interjected. "It's all for getting, rather than giving. What intimacy flows from that?" "Intimacy is dangerous stuff," said Alejo. "It's dangerous to empire. The circumcision inhibits its impact in a powerful manner. Wherever in the world the density of the circumcision is high, economic development is put on a low key and isn't happening. Instead, fascist tendencies become predominant, and war, looting, and brutality happen. The Muslim bloc of 1 billion people is densely circumcised at near 100% rate, affecting 500 million men. America is 70% circumcised, affecting 100 million men. The Jewish community has the longest history with a 100% rate all the way through. The degeneration has become so deep that these three blocks are now fighting each other in the Middle East, and not just there, but anywhere they have dealings with each other. What came out of the circumcision serves the masters of empire well, and so the process is encouraged. The development of intimacy is also fought against on the economic and financial front. The worst thing that could happen to empire is that the great nations of the world, like China, Russia, India, and the USA, establish an intimate economic bond for their cooperative development of each other, especially financially. If this was to happen, the empire would cease up. All looting would stop. It would be the end of it. And the danger to empire for this to happen someday is great. Just imagine what would be possible if these nations disconnected themselves from the monetarism of empire and extended self-directed financial credits for essential infrastructures and industrialization. We would see a wealth-creating renaissance erupting as we had never imagined before. This will happen, mark my word. The problem right now that prevents this is the USA, the circumcised country of the four powers. We will likely see the uncircumcised countries of the big four powers, India, China, and Russia, getting together in sovereign cooperation and start the Renaissance trend before the USA joins in as a partner. A great movement in humanist momentum is presently needed to break through the circumcision effects that have shackled the USA and prevent it from responding. The 30% of the still uncircumcised might cause the breakthrough to happen, which will change the world. But until this happens in a big way, intimacy is a bad word in America, as is protection, cooperation, truth, honesty, and so on. These are dangerous words. No, these are not dangerous words, I countered him. You can speak them all day, and nobody will know what you are talking about. Those words aren't used anymore. Nobody knows anymore what they mean, almost nobody. And if you stand on the street corner and talk about an electrically powered sun and the danger of an ice age, people will laugh at you. They will mock you. They'll form a chorus around you and ridicule you. If you were to tell them the truth, nobody would believe you. Your own mother wouldn't believe you, since it isn't written in the papers. That's what the newspapers are for, to educate the public not to believe in the truth. Your mother might even think you're gone bonkers when you start talking about the truth and have you committed into an asylum for the insane. No, my friend, you wouldn't be in danger at all, except perhaps to suffer the loss of all your friends. Alejo nodded, then laughed. Yes, you got me on this one, he said. Except this is nothing new, said Mariolona. That's similar to the response that Mary Baker Eddy got in her time when she spoke the truth that she proved with volumes of accounts of metaphysical spiritual healing. A century of healing, with some of it still happening, hasn't stemmed the tide of ridicule against her. What we see happening today isn't new. It's a strange phenomenon, though. Maybe it isn't that strange, said a woman from the neighboring table, who had evidently overheard our discussion. My name is Lisa, she said in a southern accent. I can tell you a secret that will make you laugh your head off. It is that unbelievable. On the other hand, you might be the exception. I've been wondering for a long time why the scientific and cultural development of mankind has gone backwards instead of forwards, possibly throughout the entire Holocene epoch. This may be caused by the lack of the Ice Age. Look at the Great Pyramids of Giza. The greatest of these is more accurately aligned to the celestial coordinates than any building that has been constructed since, and it is geometrically perfect as well. If the sum of the length of its sides is converted into a circle of the same circumference, the resulting radius is exactly equal to the height of the pyramid. The precision is so great that it reflects the ratio of pi to 5 places, past the decimal point. Also, if one compares the height of the pyramid to the distance from its center, extending to the center of its sides, the resulting ratio is exactly equal to the golden mean ratio that wasn't discovered until the 1800s, as historians say. Nevertheless, the ancients understood this complex principle 12,500 years ago and constructed a giant monument on this principle that gives the pyramid its elegant shape. The Giza pyramids were evidently the achievement of an extremely advanced ancient culture that paid close attention to universal principles and their own fidelity to them. Their attention to detail is so fine that the four sides of the Great Pyramid have been constructed with a variance of only 5/100th of a percent. Even the ground preparation has been amazingly exact. The rock plateau on which this 750-foot square monument has been erected has been leveled to a tolerance of only 2 inches. When the more modern Egyptians started to build pyramids in later years, some 4,500 years ago, to serve as tombs for their pharaohs, the resulting new constructions were shambles in comparison. Eventually they gave up the effort and simply expropriated the ancient structures for their own use. And now the masters of Egyptology are baffled by the evidence and can't figure out how these giant pyramids were made in the first place. The Giza pyramids all tell us that the ancients were master astronomers and knew that the Earth is a sphere. History tells us that this knowledge became gradually lost and wasn't rediscovered until around the time of Columbus. So, I asked myself the question, what might have caused this momentous regression in scientific perception? And here you will laugh at me, said Lisa, continuing her story. The cultural regression that seems to flow through much of the Holocene epoch might have been caused by the lack of a condition that is typical for an ice age, but is less prevalent in the interglacial period. The only factor that I am aware of which matches this pattern is the pattern of the changing intensity of the cosmic radiation. An ice age environment results when the heliosphere is shrinking with reduced solar activity, which gives us high levels of cosmic radiation, causing intense ionization in the troposphere, and consequently more intense cloud formation, less water vapor, and with it a corresponding reduction of the greenhouse effect, and subsequently, massively colder temperatures. Ice age conditions are always the result of high-intensity cosmic radiation. If one considers that cosmic radiation consists mostly of high-powered ions, protons, and electrons, bombarding whatever stands in their way, like the Earth or us human beings, one needs to ask what the effects might be of this bombardment when it is weak and when it is strong. It might be that the intensity of this radiation affects mankind's neurological development, so that a loss of it, during any interglacial period, causes neurological regression. It might be that we are creatures of the Ice Age, and need to get back to it to resume our development. I am not laughing, I said. You might be pushing this a bit too far, said Alejo. On the other hand, you might be right on the mark. Isn't there a theory put forward that the pyramids focus the cosmic radiation energy towards its center? Said Mariolona. I heard many stories about pyramid-induced healing. Ions in cosmic radiation are atomic nuclei, without attached electrons, said Alejo. That's what cosmic rays are. They are nuclei that were stripped of their electrons as they were driven to move at speeds close to the speed of light. At this velocity they pack an immense bunch, like for example, that of a cricket ball moving at 100 miles per hour, with all of that wallop packed into the minuscule size of a subatomic particle. The consensus theory is that they are derived from supernova events of exploding stars that shed all of their energy in seconds and strip atoms of their electron shells in an immense shock wave, by which visible matter is deemed to simply vanish in a shower of cosmic rays that are propelled to near light speed. The theory is a nice fairy tale that only an astronomer in intellectual free fall, who looks at the universe with his eyes squeezed shut, could believe. An astronomer with open eyes sees plasma, where the self-blinded astronomers see gas and ballistic events. And where there is plasma, the researcher with open eyes sees electric currents, double layers, electric fields, and magnetic field interaction, as in the self-organizing Birkeland currents. At extreme densities, the Birkeland currents become self-constricted into tight confinement that we call Z-pinch, or Z-pinch for short. At the super-intense regions of electric currents, as in the center of the galaxy, the energies become so great in their zip-inch confinement that the plasma becomes self-organized into atoms, whereby stars are formed, and planets. In this high-energy hubbub, atoms are likely also torn apart again, and reformed, just as ozone is formed, and is then torn apart, and is instantly reformed again in an endless sequence occurring high in our atmosphere. At the galactic center, in the high-energy hubbub, large showers of the torn-apart atoms appear to be propelled away by electromagnetic interaction, and accelerated to near light speed, like a galactic wind, akin to our solar wind. The wind, being electric, and therefore magnetically active, becomes constantly redirected by the jungle of magnetic fields that pervade the galaxy. As the result, we see them impacting the Earth from all directions at once. Some may also originate in supernova events, but those events are comparatively minuscule. Supernova events are not the fairy tale star explosions that astronomers put their children to sleep with. They are nothing more than large discharge events and networks of locally converging Brooklyn currents. A few of the cosmic rays also originate in the Sun, where the same kind of atom-forming processes take place as at the center of the galaxy, though this is minuscule in scale at the level of the Sun's surface. The bottom line is that the galactic center is the great cosmic ray-producing engine. Lisa may well be right that the cosmic ray energy shower that pervades the galaxy is the life-forming animus that has affected the Earth for its billions of years of its existence, and also became the great life-developing animus that we so casually call evolution. In the world of life, the molecular interaction unfolds on a higher-order platform than in the abiotic world, and the key for that may be the unique cosmic radiating energy. So, let's not be annoyed when this radiation also causes the massive ionization of our atmosphere, that also causes the ice age cycles. As Lisa suggests, there is a good chance that we might not exist at all if it wasn't for this life-animating radiation. Can we really say this? Interjected Mariolona. I think we can say this, said Alejo. There is a huge flow energy involved that evidently fulfills a purpose, as it is a major aspect of the dynamics of our galaxy. At the very least, the amount of flowing energy is so huge that it would be miraculous if it didn't have a major effect in some form. Let me give you an idea of what is involved here. In physics, we measure the energy of the movement of mass in units of electron volt. For example, the relative movements of the atoms in your body, as they bounce into each other in their close approximation, don't amount to much in terms of energy involved in the atomic movement. The energy that is involved there, at the atomic level, is measured as 0.03 electron volts. In comparison, the electrons hitting the Sun, in the photosphere, that create the Sun's luminance, are measured in the range of 10,000 electron volts. Now compare this with the energy that is packed into the cosmic ray particles. Cosmic rays aren't really rays as such, but are essentially tiny cannonballs hitting us, but let me tell you, they carry an immense wallop. They typically clock in at the majestic rate of 10 to the power of 20 electron volts. This makes the cosmic rays 10 million billion times more energetic than the electric energy particles that power the Sun's luminance. Fortunately, we, on Earth, are shielded from most of the cosmic ray particles. Many get stopped in the termination shock front of the heliosphere, where all the solar winds terminate their immensely fast flight and bunch up, creating quite a sizable barrier. A lot of the cosmic ray particles also get stopped in the heliosheath and the heliopause field before they even get to the termination shock, past which they enter the inner heliosphere. This means that we are extremely well protected. Nevertheless, the total measure of protection varies with the intensity of the electric dynamics operating in the heliosphere. The protection is thereby significantly lower during the Ice Age glaciation cycle, which in fact causes the glaciation. Measurements that were made by analyzing evidence from a stalagmite in a cave in the Bahamas that grew just before the end of the last Ice Age appears to tell us that the cosmic ray intensity during the glaciation period was twice as strong than it is today. But what does this mean? It means a lot for the troposphere, the upper atmosphere of the Earth, where the weather is created. In spite of all the shielding that protects the Earth from cosmic rays, the combined energy of all the cosmic rays actually reaching the Earth is enormous. However, a lot of these collide with the atoms in the atmosphere, or before they get to the atmosphere, are deflected by the Earth's magnetosphere. The combined attenuation by these two factors is equivalent to that of a slab of concrete several meters thick. However, when the cosmic rays collide with the atoms in the upper atmosphere, which they thereby ionize, they release showers of gamma rays, X-rays, and other subatomic particles. It is this soup of secondary radiation that extends down to the Earth's surface. But since these particles are extremely small, they typically pass right through an atom as it was empty space, which it largely is. Since an atom is typically 100,000 times larger than the dimensions of its parts, the cosmic ray shrapnel, and some of the cosmic rays that may have made it that far, rarely come even close to the nucleus and its swarming electrons. In this manner, the rays can travel great distances before they collide with anything. Consequently, they pass right through our houses, and us too. Thousands of these rays and fragments pass clear through us every minute of every day. Only a few crash into us, and this happens so rarely that the resulting damage is relatively small in comparison with the Earth's natural background radiation, which doesn't affect us much either. It is unlikely, therefore, that doubling of the cosmic ray effect during the Ice Age glaciation period would have a significant neurological impact as a result of collisions. However, because cosmic rays are charged particles in motion, they also create a magnetic and electric field of force around them. Naturally, these fields, and they are not minuscule, affect anything that the particle is passing through. The resulting interaction could have a healing effect. It could even have a life-creating effect or a developmental effect. We reach a threshold here where we can only speculate. We simply don't know what has caused life to be on our planet, and what propels it forward and causes consciousness and ideas and cognition. In fact, we don't even know what causes the force of gravity. The more we look at the universe and life, in its countless forms and amazing complexity, the more it becomes apparent that we look at a construct of an amazing intelligence and organization that is reflected throughout the entire system of the universe. Evidently, none of this is accidental in origin. Wherever one looks, one finds compelling evidence for an underlying intention that is reflected in harmonizing principles. We may be riding the crest of the wave of an ocean of intention that is the universe, with human qualities that reflect the creative quality of intention in our own modes of volition. In this context, I can see that the cosmic rays would have a healing and developmental quality. No, said Mariolona, cutting Alejo off. You are looking at this backwards. Don't say would. Instead say does. Something in this cosmic flow does have a healing and health-giving effect. This effect appears to be concentrated by a process that is inherent in the geometric shape of the pyramid. Maybe the pyramid acts like a waveguide that channels the cosmic ray energy into some electromagnetic form of energy that is transmitted towards its center, even while the ray particles themselves pass right through the structure. Something is mysterious about the healing effects of the pyramid structure. The volume of the reported cases and research studies is too great to push this effect aside as just imagined. Millions of books have been written about the effect of the pyramid structures. Some say that they make dreams and desires come true, and create powerful thought forms to assist one in manifesting one's life. Some use the term rapid manifestation, a state where, as they say, desires are expressed at the quantum level or in the etheric realm, which then appears in the physical plane. They say, you'll be amazed on how well and how fast this works, but be careful what you wish for. Maybe you can get what you always wanted. In this manner, remote healing is also possible, as it amplifies the natural aura or energy balance that is in anything that is subjected to its powerful vortex field of energy inside the pyramid structure. Some see the pyramid as a collector of cosmic life force energy, as they see it, and concentrating and balancing its energy field focused onto a person, where it unfolds extraordinary healing powers. My point is, Mario Alona continued, that you and I, and all mankind, are the best and most beautiful, and the most precious manifest of creation, in the universe, or are an aspect of the whole, that is the universe itself, that we are living in, and that we should not disregard this ever. We know that life is an exceedingly precious process, and we also know that even the purely molecular processes unfold in a different manner in living processes. There is something that sets the two apart. The ancients may have discovered a way to amplify the process and direct it in accord with their desires by simply channeling the cosmic energy flux that was stronger and more abundant in their time. Maybe this is where the high-altitude monasteries got their appeal from, as the cosmic ray intensity is somewhat greater at high altitudes. I don't think we should write Lisa's theory off the map of mankind's self-directed evolution during the Ice Age epochs. She puts a valid point forward that makes more sense to me than almost anything that I have heard so far. This makes sense to me too, I interjected. However, I also think that thought, all by itself, can create its own life and health-giving energy field that causes profound development and amazing healing. And all of this without the aid of the pyramid device. Hasn't Mary Baker Eddy set a pure metaphysical healing trend in motion that far surpassed any healing claim attributed to the pyramids, and which could be taught to others to be applied in turn by them, a process that lasted for a century? This is true, said Mario Alona. However, there is a glitch in this. Mary Baker Eddy was born in 1821. This puts her birth and childhood smack into the middle of the weakest sunspot period, since records are kept short of the Maunder minimum. The sunspot low coincides with a corresponding high in cosmic ray intensity. Also, throughout the years of her work the sunspot activity remained relatively low. However, the most amazing thing is that the entire Second Renaissance in Europe, from the development towards the Peace of Westphalia onwards, occurred during the Maunder minimum, the deepest lowing recorded sunspot cycles that lasted almost a century and a half. Out of this background came great revolutionary geniuses, such as Johannes Kepler, Gottfried Leibniz, Benjamin Franklin, Friedrich Schiller, Johann Sebastian Bach, Franz Joseph Haydn, Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, Ludwig van Beethoven, and so on. In short, the entire cultural uplift that gave rise to what we call our modern civilization originated in this brief period of a high cosmic ray energy background. Maybe there exists a deeper connection between cosmic ray intensity and advanced humanist development. I think what we are seeing here is just the low-level evidence, I interjected. I think we human beings have the capacity to take this to much higher levels, where love is the evidence. Just look at us. We behold each other with a great joy. We are beautiful to each other in our mind. Shouldn't this capacity to love also be a part of the force of intention, that is the universe itself, the intention of love? We haven't created love, we just move with it and step in its light. We don't need a pyramid for that. All we need is a kiss. Maybe love is a more powerful and profound healing and developing impetus than anything that we have yet come across. Mostly it is the development potential that interests me. The universe operates on a remarkable efficient platform of economics. It starts with an intention and then asks what is required to get it implemented. It then simply creates what is needed to get there. It creates the principles that make it happen. We keep asking, before we do anything, what's the profit for me? And since the profit isn't enough, nothing much gets done. We should duplicate the principle of economics that the universe operates on and find our profit in what is being created and produced. Love isn't a profit engine. It is a wealth-creating engine. Isn't love also a life force? Said Mario Alona. Why must we limit ourselves to physically measurable force? Isn't the universe more evidently spiritual than not? The evidence that we see of it speaks of an incredible intelligence and principle with harmonizing intention and effect. Why should these be expressed only in the forms we are familiar with? Couldn't there be spirit beings in existence that we have only the faintest traces of evidence for, if any? UFOs have been sighted, photographed, and filmed in great numbers, and not just near the Earth, but have also been filmed by NASA on the Moon, though never in recognizable details. Are they plasma events, as a layho might suggest, or are they life forms that are not carbon and water-based, but are energy-based, living in space, fed by a form of life energy that we do not yet understand, that is of a higher order than plasma and cosmic radiation? If such beings did exist, how would they communicate with us? Would they use crop circles? Many of the more recent crop images are of a complexity in design that matches modern computer-created art. But we don't know who made them and how they were made. The bending of the crops is precise, and the bending is done at the nodes. Typically, the nodes give the plants their strength. When grain stalks bend, they bend between the nodes, not at the nodes. What life force alteration causes the nodes to change? The nodes keep a plant upright because they collect water. The water pressure in the nodes makes the stalk rigid. In the crop images, the stalks are bent because their nodes were dehydrated. Researchers have discovered a hole in the affected nodes that looks like an escape vent for water vapor after intense heating. Yet, the nodes are bent selectively and in two precisely aligned directions, nor are they bent uniformly. Some are bent at the lowest knuckle, others are bent higher up the stalk, according to the requirement of the shading of the images, with all of these variations occurring within the same image formation. The shading is so complex that as the crop continues to grow, the resulting image changes in appearance. Also, it has been reported that in the years following the crop circles, increased yields of up to 40% have been observed. These phenomena and their precise selective application cannot be produced by any process known in agriculture, or botany, or thermocause, or even radiation technology, as far as I know, or as far as has been revealed by any scientific or governmental agency. Pranksters certainly would not have this capability, much less the power to affect the soil in a manner that it causes increased crop yields in subsequent years. I don't know what this means, but it means something. If one adds to this puzzle the UFO phenomenon and the potential existence of energy-based life forms in space, because something definitely exists along this line, then I must say that we really don't know anything yet about the nature of life, and of intelligence, and of the universe. Maria Alona glanced at Alejo when she finished speaking, as if to invite a comment. He shrugged his shoulders. "This goes beyond any physics known to me," he said to her. "In terms of what you are talking about, we still live with a flat earth type mentality, where our environment is strictly physical. The concept of intention doesn't enter the scene. If it doesn't conform to quantum physics, we say it doesn't exist. Sure, I can imagine plasma phenomena in the form of moving specks of light, but NASA filmed black spots moving over the light background of the moon, slowing down, speeding up, smoothly changing direction. This doesn't correspond with any natural physics known to me, but NASA filmed it. Space travel between solar systems is impossible by any known method, precluding interstellar travels. The kind of spaceship cannot be built that travels even remotely close to light speed. And even if this was possible, a ship traveling at this speed would be ripped to shreds by cosmic rays and plasma streams. Also, should a ship miraculously survive all that, the travel to the nearest star would take a dozen years at near light speed. And to the farthest star of our galaxy, the travel time would likely be trillions of millennia in duration. This doesn't mean that thought, life, and intention, as ideas unfolding, can travel instantly anywhere and be felt throughout the universe, since after all, principle unfolds throughout the universe everywhere simultaneously, though in countless different expressions. Maybe that is where the frontier lies. We may be facing the threshold to an incredible frontier here that lies as far outside the rationally explainable as does the phenomenon of universal gravitation that is intimately common in everyday life, which is measurable and affects everyone, but defies all rationality for discovering the cause of it. According to all we know in nuclear physics, gravity should not exist, but it does exist. Here, we cross the threshold into the realm of universal intention, where we find a whole raft of phenomena that defy rationality according to our best perception, such as life, spirit, and love, and possibly mind. As we step across the great threshold into the as yet unknown, we seem to discover that more likely than not, we haven't seen anything yet, as if we had looked at the universe so far with our eyes squeezed shut. Sylvia applauded Alejo and Mariolona. "Those are fascinating stories that you are bringing to light here," said Sylvia. Her expression, though, seemed to indicate that she was somewhat overwhelmed by all of that. We all agreed with her that the wider reality is a fascinating subject indeed. We also agreed that we should go back to the temple for some more dancing, to get our grounding again, and celebrate the few discoveries of reality, like the principle of universal love, that we are able to understand, which she said are incredibly beautiful, too beautiful to be allowed to drift out of sight, in the shadow of the unknown. "Indeed we should celebrate," I replied, "but let's expand the process. Would you join us, Lisa?" I said to Lisa with a bow. And this is what we did. Lisa joined us. We danced with each other, and with others as well, until we were completely exhausted once more. As it turned out, the place had become crowded before we returned from Aladdin's palace, with no tables left for us in the hall, or any other places for us to sit down and relax after another sequence of dancing the night away. Mariolona suggested that since there was no place to sit down, this meant that the time had come to say goodbye. We all concurred. We wished each other a pleasant journey to our respective home, since we had all come from different cities. And so, we parted as friends, and to some degree, as lovers too. Sylvia's response was a great big smile on her face all the way back to the hotel. More than this was not needed for the celebration to be complete. Our private world had changed that day. It had changed enormously, and she was still with me, and more firmly now than ever before. What more could anyone dream of? We arrived at the hotel arm in arm, but there was nothing there at the hotel that we wanted. Being stuck in a hotel room seemed too confining. "Let's go out and have some ice cream, to celebrate the occasion some more," I suggested to Sylvia. She agreed. She said that this was a perfect idea, much better than sitting in a hotel room. We asked the hotel captain, as we came in, if there was an ice cream parlor nearby. He shook his head. "You can get ice cream at the coffee shop, or through room service," he said. "That won't do. We need something big for celebration," I replied. He nodded. "What you really want is something bigger than ice cream," he said. "You want a cultural celebration." He looked at this watch. Quite often around this time, some of the professional musicians and performing artists, mostly from the Kennedy Center, get together in a pub near here. If you are lucky, you may catch them celebrating their triumphant achievements, performing for each other. Ice cream is nothing compared to that. The place is just north of DuPont Circle, in one of the side streets, on the way to the Phillips Gallery. It's called The Lion. There is a large blue neon sign of a lion in front of it. You can't miss it. We thanked the kind man with a tip for his advice, but declined the cab that he offered. Walking seemed better. We stopped just briefly at the room to freshen up. As we were getting ready to leave, I asked Sylvia jokingly whether she might not have forgotten to ask something of me that she hadn't voiced yet since our great encounter in the morning began. "You mean me asking you to promise that you will never look at another woman again, ever?" she said, and waved a finger at me. "I had this in mind, you know. But how can I possibly ask this now? Isn't it amazing how much our world has changed in one single day? I was determined this morning to ask for a divorce, and now we are closer than we've ever been before. Still, I must ask you to consider this very thing," I said in a serious tone. "You have grown up and built a basis for making this judgment. I can promise you with all my heart that I will always cherish you no matter what lies before us, because you are in my heart and are bound to stay there. But the new world before us is an extremely demanding world from what I can recognize. It opens the horizon to great freedoms, but these freedoms could also cause great damage if we screw up. And even if we don't screw up, it will surely involve quite a few challenges that come with the blessings. Are you willing and daring to be the kind of pioneer who wants to venture with me into the new world before us? The future promises to be bright, but no one can guarantee that we will be able to tread safely in all respects. Of course I'll be with you, Peter, Sylvia responded before I even finished. A divorce is no longer possible. You illustrated all day where a divorce would fit in, and that's no longer an option. And how did I do this? With the two types of models, Peter, the vertical and the lateral model, and you related them to science and to truth. In the lateral model we stand side by side with each other because at the top level no hierarchical differentiation is possible. There, the truth is the truth. We can't go above it or below it. We are all part of it and can't get away from it. A divorce really is not possible there. That is where we find our universal humanity and all the spiritual aspects that the eyes cannot see, such as love, spirit, soul, mind, life, and principle, all existing in the absolute sense, with our humanity existing at the same level and reflecting all of them. That's the reality of our being. This means that our loving has to reflect that level. That's what unites us as one, and that is bigger and more profound than anything we had before. But how do we get there? I interjected. Obviously, science provides us a path to it. But science is not an absolute thing. It operates on a vertical model, like a tool for developing a progressive recognition and appreciation of our humanity. As a vertical structure, science has a top and a bottom. At its leading edge we might call this the science of the spiritual idea of our divinity as human beings. Considering the capacities that we find in our humanity as creators of new worlds and of a richer universe, we truly are divine beings, together with anything else to which this term might apply, such as our love, mind, or recognition of principles. These are our attributes. At this leading edge, our science is our gateway to discovering the reality of our being. At the bottom level, however, the vertical structure of science gives way to the inverted vertical structure that represents the very opposite of science, the perversion of science, the domain where science is lacking completely and universal principles are deemed not to apply. That's dangerous ground. That's the sphere of depravity, violence, theft, rape, etc., in all their countless forms. That's the inverted vertical structure that represents the imperial vertical model. The process of progressive science, of course, gives us a great deal of freedom to move, but if we screw up we may end up in dangerous territory, the imperial territory, the territory of depravity. Divorce isn't only possible there, but happens almost inevitably. However, the middle ground is dangerous too, said Sylvia, and grinned. The middle ground is called morality. It's a transitional place that represents neither science nor depravity. It's a dead kind of place where nothing really moves. It's a perfect place for falling asleep and no confrontations are happening at the middle ground. No dangers are faced there, but neither do we find any freedom at this middle ground, or any power to uplift civilization. I hugged Sylvia for saying that. You are perfectly correct, I said. The middle ground is a wonderful position for one to fall asleep in. That's the kind of life that you're opting for. A divorce would assure. You would marry another person who loves to be asleep with you. I personally think you would never choose that. Still, I need to ask you if you are ready to step away from this middle ground, called morality, in the face of all the dangers that are involved, and all the challenges that we may be confronted with by dancing together at the leading edge of scientific discovery. Sylvia began to laugh. What choice is this, Peter? A choice between sleeping and dancing? I've already chosen the dancing. It may be risky, but there is life in it. Ultimately, the choice isn't made by us, Sylvia, I interrupted her. Life makes the choice for us. It has been my experience that we can't turn away what is in our heart, which demands scientific explorations. To turn away from what is in our heart would put us to sleep indeed. and it would put us into a precarious situation that may get us all killed with our eyes closed when the fascism of the world is destroying our civilization. Sleeping is a dangerous state. Life is a dynamic thing, always growing and expanding and becoming ever more precious. Every tree grows higher and higher, but the moment it stops growing, it decays. A steady state existence is not possible in life. Life is development, constant development. The moment when life stops developing itself, it ceases to be, and what is left collapses into decay. That is why mankind cannot exist without an Ice Age renaissance. Going back to the 5 million world population that we had during the last Ice Age is not only not an acceptable option, it is impossible. We can't go back. Going back probably means extinction. We have to go forward with a 10 billion people Ice Age renaissance. Nor is there a middle ground possible. The so-called middle ground is not a natural state, and therefore is not possible. It is a mythological state, and those who pursue the merely moral position of doing nothing towards creating the new renaissance corresponding to the middle ground, put themselves and the whole of mankind into a precarious position. With their eyes closed, they slip unwittingly into the imperial night of depravity, where no scientific and spiritual development takes place, where they are spoon-fed with lies and become corrupted by imperial systems and enslaved to toil by the fascism that reigns in this dark world, until at last mankind is offering up its life as a sacrifice on the altar of depopulation. That's what I am inviting you to move away from, because the whole world is slipping into this bottomless pit of the depravity trap, and it isn't pretty what I see, I said. Still, as I said, living at the leading edge can be dangerous. We enter uncharted waters. The dangers there are real. However, there is life at the leading edge, an unbounded dynamism. Of course, while we are facing the dangers and the challenges at the leading edge, I can promise you one thing. I can promise you that you will always be at the pinnacle of my loving. No matter to what height loving becomes elevated in its boundlessly unfolding universal development, you will be at the pinnacle of it, above the clouds, touching the stars. Sylvia responded with a long-lasting embrace and a kiss. People say that it is dangerous to walk alone in Washington late at night. But did we heed this caution? No, not us. Not this time. Life was no longer to be hemmed in. Now I am beginning to understand your story about the kingdom that lost the ability to write songs of love, said Sylvia, as we entered Massachusetts Avenue at Scott Circle, still looking for a place where we could get ice cream. The people of the kingdom had once written those songs of love with such purity and brilliance that they became empowered thereby to liberate themselves from their oppressor. But once the people became oppressors themselves, they lost their ability to write those songs of love. Isn't this the story of our world, Peter, the story of the 3,000 years war that mankind has not yet been able to win? Who is writing songs of the principle of universal love, and is singing them? Nobody has so far. But now you come along and say to me, Sylvia, let's write those songs of love again, and let's write them with such purity that all forms of division and isolation melt away, and we find ourselves empowered to claim the freedom to love universally. Isn't that also what Mario Nolona's story was about, the power of love that enriches humanity and lifts it to the edge of the sublime, where wars become impossible? Mario Nolona spoke of a renaissance of the human soul, didn't she? She spoke of a kind of loving that is free from exceptions, I interjected, which is a hard one to get to, but not impossible. Those songs of love that the king thought could not be written when the enslavement of corruption was deemed to be freedom, can indeed be written on the higher level of perception, on a scientific basis. So let's write them together, Sylvia, you and I. Let's do this. Even if the world looks hopeless and precarious, let's write those songs anyway, because the principle of love is still the same as it was long before the Dark Ages began. Wasn't the agricultural revolution that gave mankind the dynamism of a boundless existence a profound song of universal loving? the 7,000-year interlude that stopped the process for some dark ages can be brought to a close by us, because the interlude of darkness means nothing more than that mankind has been asleep for a while, ready to be awakened. So, my dear, we can now say to the king, in the name of the holy person, said Sylvia, and in the name of the scientific discovery of the truth about our humanity, that we will write those new songs for the king, songs of love for mankind with such purity that they will empower the people to regain their freedom from their self-oppression. We will write those songs of love with our life. If we don't do this, Sylvia, who will? This means that the king, representing mankind, will not take his puzzle unanswered with him to his grave, I said to Sylvia, meaning that there won't be a grave for mankind in its near future, or in any future. Yes, I think we can write those songs of universal loving with our life that will assure this, said Sylvia, and nodded. And with those songs of love in our heart we will be dancing at the pinnacle of the world, I added. Sylvia responded with a kiss. As it was, we didn't find an ice cream place anywhere along the way. We found something better. We found a small grocery store that had bundles of flowers for sale. I picked up 2 dark red roses and gave them to Sylvia. She looked at me with questioning eyes. What is that supposed to mean? She asked finally. Those 2 roses represent what our lives have been like until now, I said, and began to grin. Then I picked up all the rest of the roses from the bucket and gave them to her. Those represent what our lives may be like from now on. I grinned as I said this and kissed her. This time she didn't protest. She nodded and kissed me in return. She also insisted on paying for half of them, which seemed to have a beautiful symbolic meaning. So it was that with a great bundle of roses in our hand, we went happily our way to the pub, looking for the sign of the giant blue lion. The hotel captain had been right. This was a place for cultural celebration. The place was filled with musicians and singers, and a few other people who enjoyed being among them. Look, somebody is bringing us roses, said one of the singers as we entered, interrupting her song. The roses come with one condition attached, said Sylvia. We'll gladly share them with anyone who is committed to promoting the principle of universal love, from the grassroots level up, to create a renaissance big enough so that the coming ice age will be a non-event. You mean the current ice age, in our dealing with one another as human beings, said the singer. That too. For starters, said Sylvia, and started handing a rose to each performer. It seemed to me that Sylvia's criterion was satisfied by the lack of anyone mentioning global warming. It also seemed that the performers understood in some way that classical music is related to universal love, as both are rooted together in our humanity. Moments later, a tall young fellow stood up and called out to another man across the room. Albert, did you bring your violin? If you have, let's do the donkey tonight. But let's do it the way it ought to be done, not as the music director thinks an audience wants to hear it. Let's do it from the heart. So it was that half an hour later, after things setting up and a bit of chatting, in the middle of the night, and in the most untraditional setting that one can imagine, surrounded by beer mugs, the great Donkey Trio by Antonin Dvorak was being performed, and in grand style. The music and the performance of it perfectly reflected the kind of day our day had been. Albert personally introduced the artist that night. He had bowed deep and had grinned with one of our roses pinned to his vest. Ladies and gentlemen, the Opus 90, the Donkey Trio by Antonin Dvorak, the greatest trio for violin, cello, and piano ever composed, performed by the world's greatest musicians, for the world's greatest audience, small as it may be, which awards us roses, before we even draw the bow. Our victory, that night, mainly over ourselves, in celebration with the musicians, unfolded into one of the loveliest nights Sylvia and I have had together. We celebrated some kind of a turning point, behind which all the gloomy problems were left behind, as in the fog. We walked on, after the musicians had ended their extensive performance, that seemed to have been given in our honor. It was early morning when the musicians packed up and left. We left with them and walked out into the night with the music still echoing in the mind, occasionally looking for an ice cream store. Here the idea emerged to stay up for the sunrise. Sylvia and I picked up the car at the hotel and started to drive, hoping to find the most perfect spot for the occasion. We also found an ice cream palace along the way in the early hours of the dawn at a truck stop. Of course, we had more than just a simple ice cream cone there. Each of us had a full-fledged sundae with all the trimmings, as loaded as it can get, and we had fun eating all of it. As for me, I enjoyed every minute that we were together. A sense of pride came over me for the privilege of being married to this wonderful woman. The joy that I felt that morning was faintly reminiscent of the excitement that I had shared with Olive, and the gratitude I had felt for Terry's touch and Ushi's wide-open love, and Helen's sensitivity to the truth about our humanity. I found them all reflected in Sylvia, like sparks of light from the soul that illumines the universe.